Welcome students. Today we will start chapter number 19, manufacturing accounts. Okay. See, these are the objectives that you have to cover for your CIEs. I'm not going to read these because I'm going to cover these with you anyways in these slides. You can pause and take a quick look and then let's move on with these one by one. Okay. Manufacturing businesses. ठीक है. Till now we were discussing trading businesses. Trading businesses are those businesses who simply buy goods and then resell them in the market. ठीक है? Which means they purchase goods from someone and then they sell it to other people. So these are why that's why they're called trading businesses, because they're trading, they're buying and selling, purchasing goods, selling goods. You remember in the income statement we have sales, okay, and then in the cost of sales section we have purchases. So they are purchasing these goods, this is their cost of sales, and then they sell these goods to make income. So these are trading businesses. Now we will talk about manufacturing businesses. Manufacturing businesses are those who manufacture their own goods. In simple words, who produce or make their own goods. Okay? They start with raw materials and then they manufacture those goods and then they sell them. They are not buying goods from someone, they are manufacturing. They are producing their own goods, manufacturing, and then they are selling these goods. Okay, so instead of purchasing, they are manufacturing their own goods. Obviously, how do you manufacture goods? Using raw materials. We will talk about all that in the coming slides. For now, you should just understand the meaning of manufacturing businesses. Obviously, a sole trader business can also be a manufacturing business or a trading business. Okay? A sole trader business that we discussed in chapter 15 can be a trading business. It means he or she is buying goods from someone and then selling them, or it can also be a manufacturing business, which means they manufacture their own goods and then sell them in the market. Okay? Similarly, a partnership can be a trading business or a manufacturing business. Okay? It is not necessary it can only be a trading business. It can also be a trading or a manufacturing business. For now, what we have discussed in chapter 15 and chapter 16, one second, let me write it here. For now, we have covered chapter number 15, which is sole trader, and then chapter number 16, partnerships. When we covered these topics, we were looking at the examples and the questions, assuming that they were trading businesses, right? There was no manufacturing involved or anything like that. Now we have to discuss about manufacturing. They can also be manufacturing businesses, right? Now, let's move on. See, I've told you about this in detail just now, trading businesses versus manufacturing businesses, but I want to use this time and tell you about the importance of chapter number 15 again. Chapter 15, sole trader. Chapter 15 is very, very important for all the topics that you will study, at least in the first term of O2 accounting, right? It will help you in partnerships, which is chapter 16, as you saw. Okay? It will help you in manufacturing accounts. It will help you with the topic of limited companies, and it will help you with clubs and societies in a way as well. So sole trader is very, very important. If you haven't watch the videos, or if you're not aware of this topic, please watch part 1 and part 2 before you begin manufacturing accounts. Okay, it is very, very important to form your basics first. If you have the basics, if you know in detail about sole trader businesses, how to make their statements, how to make the adjustments, these topics will become very, very easy for you. I will only cover the new things. Okay, for example, in a manufacturing business, the SOFP is exactly the same, apart from a minor change in the current asset section. I will I will only discuss that change. I will not go through the SOFP in detail. Why? Because I've covered that in sole trader topic in detail. Okay? So I will only cover the changes or the new things that are part of this chapter. Again, the adjustments, accruals, prepayments, depreciations, these are same as that of a sole trader business. So I will not cover those again, right? So you have to go through sole trader first before moving on to this topic. That's what I want to say. Moving on. Okay. Now, in a trading business, we usually need an office, right? Where the staff would be, the admin staff, the sales staff. We need an office, maybe a shop if it's not an online business. You can also sell your products online. In that case, you just need an office, but you might also need a shop if you're selling goods inside a shop. You might also need a warehouse. So these were the things that you needed for a trading business. Now, in a manufacturing business, you need something extra, right? What do you need? How will you manufacture your goods? Where will you manufacture your goods? Socho, think. Obviously, you need a factory, right? This is where you will manufacture your own goods. So usually you will need a factory to manufacture or produce goods. Why am I telling you that? Because just like you need a factory, you will also have to prepare an additional statement, an additional financial statement. Let's discuss that. One second, let's move here. Or let's just do it here. See, in a trading business, what were we preparing? Let's take sole trader as an example. This is a sole trader trading business. And let's say this is a sole trader manufacturing business. Sole trader का मतलब a single owner running and maintaining and financing the business. Okay. So which statements were we making? We were making the income statement to calculate the profit or loss made by the business. And we were preparing the statement of financial position, which is a list of all the non-current assets, current assets, non-current liabilities, current liabilities, and the capital investment of the owner in the business. So these two were the statements that we needed. We needed only two financial statements. Now, in a manufacturing business, you will still have an income statement to calculate the profit or loss made by your business. You will still have a statement of financial position to list down all your non-current assets, non-current liabilities, current liabilities, and capital. But apart from these, you will need another statement. Just like you have an extra thing, which is a factory, you will also need another statement to record the costs of the factory. You cannot simply record them in the income statement. You need to prepare a separate statement called a manufacturing account. Manufacturing account. What is calculated in the manufacturing account? All the costs relating to the factory. So in simple words, we call it cost of production, cost of manufacturing goods, right? Cost of production. The cost that you had to incur in order to make the products. So cost of production, simple. This is what we calculate in the manufacturing account. So there is an extra statement. Now, let's move on to types of expenses in a factory. We have two types of expenses, direct expenses and indirect expenses. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's read this first and then I will explain in my own words and make it simple for you. Let's read this first. Direct costs are expenses directly traceable to the creation of a specific product or service, like raw materials for a toy or the salary of a worker assembling it. Direct costs क्या होते हैं? Direct costs are easily traceable. You can easily tell that yes, this is the cost of manufacturing this good. and it is only being used to manufacture this specific good. ठीक है? Let's take an example. Let's say we have a furniture factory. We are manufacturing furniture here. We are making tables, we are making chairs, and we are also making a lot of other things. We are making lockers, we are making cupboards and all that. ठीक है? So let's take table as an example. ठीक है? What are the direct costs necessary to manufacture this table? First of all, the labor that is working on this table, ठीक है, whose specific job is to manufacture this table. ठीक है? He took the wood and then he's cutting the wood, he's joining the pieces together, and he's preparing the table. He's also polishing the table later. So that labor is called direct labor, those who are directly involved in manufacturing of the products. ठीक है? So we will call this, let me erase this and write direct labor to make it simple. Direct labor. Secondly, how are we manufacturing this table? We need raw material. ठीक है? So raw material is also a direct cost. ठीक है? What can you call it? You can simply call it direct material or raw material. This is also a direct cost because this raw material is specifically being used to manufacture these tables. So it can be easily traced. Okay, this much wood was used to manufacture this table. ठीक है? Easily traceable, directly traceable. And not just raw material, you will need a lot of other things as well to make this table. Then what else? ठीक है? There is a term called royalties. For example, we have copied the design of someone. ठीक है? In that case, we will have to pay a royalty to that person or business. Let's say they charge $1 per table as royalty fees. We have copied their design. We are just copying their design. They have made this table before. We have copied it. And we have taken permission from them to manufacture this table using their design. But now we have to pay them a royalty on that. ठीक है? $1 per table, for example. So royalties are also direct expenses because it can be easily traced that we have to pay this much per table, easily traceable, right? Then another expense is use of a special machine or hiring a special machine for a job. ठीक है? Hire of a special machine. Let's say there's a specific color that we want this table of, and you need a special machine for that color. You cannot use the ordinary machine you're using for the other objects in your factory. You need a special machine to paint it like you want to. ठीक है? Or you got a specific order in which they requested you to paint it in that color and in that texture. For that you need a special machine. So if you're hiring a special machine, let's say you rented it for a month to just complete this order. So in that case, this is also a direct expense, right? Because this machine is only being used to manufacture this table, right? Now when you get your questions, raw materials will always be given in, like, let's say 100% of the questions. ठीक है? Direct labor will be there in obviously 100% of the questions. Royalties will sometimes be given, sometimes not. ठीक है? So it might be given in, let's say, 20 or 30% of the questions, and then hire of a special machine is usually given in like 10% of the questions that you get. But they're still your direct costs. So you should know these. If you get them in the question, you have to include them in the direct costs. ठीक है? Now, let's take the example of indirect costs of the factory. ठीक है? ये तो हो गए direct costs. These are our direct costs. Moving on to the indirect costs. One more thing, all the direct costs are also called prime cost. ठीक है? Direct costs sum of direct cost is called prime cost. This is the primary cost. मतलब the major chunk of the cost is this, ठीक है, which contains cost of raw materials plus direct labor plus any other direct expense such as royalties. One second, let me write it here. Let's erase this and let me tell you one more time what prime cost is. ठीक है, direct material or raw materials, cost of raw materials plus direct labor cost plus any other direct expense such as royalties or hire of a special machine and such. Those costs which you can easily tell, yes, they relate to the manufacture of this table 100%. ठीक है, you can easily tell that. Those are your direct costs. These three make up prime cost. ठीक है. Now moving on to the indirect costs. What can be the indirect costs of the factory? Start thinking. Those costs that are necessary for the factory to operate, but they do not have a direct link with the manufacturing of this table. What can be the indirect costs? ठीक है, let me tell you some. Salary of the factory guard. Okay, you need a guard for security. Is the guard involved in manufacturing the table? Is he cutting the wood for you? No, right? So this cost is necessary for the factory, for the safety of the factory, so that no one comes and steal your things. But the factory guard is not directly involved in the manufacturing process. So this is an indirect cost of the factory. ठीक है? Then supervisor. Again, the supervisor is looking after everything. ठीक है? He's not just looking after the manufacturing process. Obviously, he's also checking on that are the workers working properly? Are they doing their job? He will check that. But it's not his only purpose in the factory. He will also see, is the factory clean? Are the cleaners doing their job? ठीक है? Is this light working? If it is not working, he will assign someone to fix it or change it, right? So supervisor is not looking after only the manufacturing process, but after everything relating to the factory. Again, cleaning staff. Cleaning staff. Is the cleaning staff manufacturing your table? No, right? They are just cleaning the factory. So they are also an indirect cost. ठीक है? Cleaning the factory is necessary. Obviously, you need a clean space to work. But they're not directly manufacturing those goods. They're just indirectly involved in the factory, right? And similarly, electricity, because you're manufacturing a lot of goods in the factory, you cannot tell how much electricity is being consumed to manufacture tables. Electricity bill, water bill, and all these things. And to some extent, also, the depreciation of factory machinery is an indirect cost, because that machinery is not just used to manufacture tables, it might be used for various purposes. ठीक है? So depreciation of factory machine. This is also an indirect cost. I hope you have an idea about direct and indirect costs of the factory now. ठीक है? Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is a person cutting wood and building tables. Obviously, this is your direct cost. You can call it direct labor, because he's directly involved in the manufacture or production of goods, which is table in this case. But the factory guard, he's not manufacturing the table, but he's necessary, he's required for the factory. So it's an indirect labor. What do we call them? Indirect labor. ठीक है? Again, the factory cleaner is also indirect labor. ठीक है? Because they are not manufacturing the goods, they are not part of the manufacturing process, they are just necessary for the factory. So they are indirect expenses of the factory or indirect costs. And then we have the supervisor. Again, is the supervisor direct labor or indirect? Obviously indirect, because he's not just looking after the manufacturing process, he's also looking after the guard. Is the guard doing his job? Is the cleaner doing his job? Is everything fine in the factory? So a supervisor is not specifically there to watch the direct labor. Okay? That's why supervisor is also an indirect expense of the factory. Now moving on. Financial statements of a manufacturing business. I have told you. Now let me discuss this in detail. Okay, we need three statements. The first one that you will make is a manufacturing account. In which we will calculate the cost of production. Okay, which is simply all the direct expenses plus the indirect expenses of the factory. So factory cost of production. Okay. Then we will have an income statement which is exactly same apart from a minor change which I will discuss with you. And then we have an SOFP, and the change is only in the current asset section, and I will talk about that as well. I will only talk about the new things in detail, so I will cover manufacturing account in detail. I will cover the changes to the SOFP, which is the current asset section, in detail. I will not go through the entire SOFP or the adjustments necessary for the income statement because we have covered that in chapter 15 sole trader already. Okay, and then in the income statement we will generally discuss the cost of sales section because that's the only section that is a bit different, and I will have to tell you why it is different. Okay, other than that the income statement is also very much similar to that of a sole trader. So let's erase this and move on. This is the format of a manufacturing account. Okay, we will use this whenever they ask us to prepare a manufacturing account. We just have to follow this format. Okay, following formats is important. Please always follow format, even though you will get, let's say you messed up direct costs and indirect costs, you will still get the same cost of production. Okay, even if they are not under the same heading, but you will lose marks for not using the format, for not identifying them as direct and indirect expenses separately. So make sure you follow the format. Okay, let's look at the format and then we will solve a practice question, and then this topic will be clear. Also, this new account that we have to prepare, which is called the manufacturing account, will be clear. See, the first part from here till here, okay, this is to calculate the cost of raw materials consumed. Which means during the year, what was the cost of raw materials used in the factory? Okay? What was the cost of raw materials used? In simple words, how much did we pay for the raw materials to produce these goods? Okay? So how do we calculate that? It is very much similar to the cost of sales section of the income statement. As you can see, it is exactly same. Okay? First of all, you start with opening inventory of raw materials. What is opening inventory of raw materials? This is the inventory that is left over from the last year. Okay? The unused raw material left over from the last year. What is opening inventory of raw materials? I'm repeating one more time. This is the leftover raw material from the previous year. So obviously we have to record it in cost of material consumed because we will use it this year, right? Opening inventory of last year will be used this year, so we have to include this as cost of raw materials consumed. Then we will also purchase more raw material during the year because that is not enough. We cannot just use the opening inventory and we are done. No, we also need to purchase more. Okay? And when you purchase more, you have to include it as cost of material consumed because this is the cost you have to pay to bring raw materials into the factory. Now, again, you will also have to pay transportation cost on raw materials, and this is your cost of material consumed. So you have to add this as well, right? And then finally, you will simply less closing inventory of raw materials. This is the inventory that remained unsold. Okay, the leftover, sorry, not unsold, unprepared or unused. Okay, closing inventory of raw materials is the raw materials that remained unused. We did not use it this year. Unused this year. So when we did not use it this year, we cannot include it in the cost of material consumed for the current year. Okay. So this is what we do. When I will solve a question, it will be more clear, but I'm explaining it for the first time. Okay. Once you do all this working, in simple words, once you add these three, okay, and then minus closing inventory from it, you will get a figure. This amount is cost of raw materials consumed. You can also call it direct material. See, the cost of direct material. And you know that cost of raw materials consumed is a direct cost. Okay? It can be easily traced to the production of a good. So it's a direct cost. Now, after that we move on to direct wages and simply add it to cost of raw materials consumed. Because I told you, okay, we add all the direct expenses. What are direct wages? Wages of the staff working on the manufacture of the goods. Okay? Their primary purpose in the factory is to produce goods. So they are directly involved in the manufacturing process. So we have to add direct labor or direct wages. It's the same thing. Okay? Direct labor or wages, it's the same thing. These are those people who are directly involved in the manufacturing process. And then any direct expense, I've told you about two, okay, such as royalties or hire of a special machine. So plus any direct expense. What did I tell you? When you add these three, what do you get? You get prime cost. And that is what is present in the manufacturing account. Okay? Once you add these three, which is cost of raw materials consumed, direct labor and direct expenses, you get prime cost. Okay? Prime cost is simply all the direct costs of the factory. What is prime cost? The sum of all the direct expenses or direct costs of the factory. Once you're done finding the prime cost, you will add all the other expenses of the factory, all the indirect expenses, which we also call as factory overheads. Factory overheads क्या हैं? Factory overheads are the indirect expenses of the factory. ठीक है? Indirect. मतलब miscellaneous expenses which are necessary to run the factory, but they are not directly part of the manufacturing process. Such as indirect wages में क्या क्या आ जाता है? In indirect wages we have supervisors, cleaners, ठीक है, security guard, all those people who are needed in the factory to run the factory, but they're not involved in the manufacturing process. ठीक है. Factory rent and rates, again this is an indirect cost because you cannot trace it easily. ठीक है, because in the factory you're manufacturing a lot of things, not just tables. Then again, factory insurance, fuel and power, general expenses, depreciation of factory machinery, all these are your indirect expenses, those that cannot be easily traced. They cannot be traced. I cannot tell that, okay, I used, let's say my total electricity expense was $100,000. I cannot tell that, okay, I used $20,000 to manufacture table, the rest was for the miscellaneous expenses of the factory. No. Even if it's traceable, it is a lot of work to do that. So why would you? You just include these as indirect expenses and you're done. Okay? Indirect expenses are those which cannot be easily traced to the manufacturing process. Okay. Once you're done with all this, you add all of these and bring a final amount here. Okay? Now what should you do? Should you add prime cost plus this or subtract? Think for a bit. I'm giving you 3 seconds to think. Should I add prime cost plus all the indirect expenses or not to calculate cost of production? Obviously, you should add these two. Why? Because the purpose of preparing a manufacturing account is to calculate the total costs of the factory. What is the manufacturing account used for? To calculate cost of producing goods, या cost of production. And cost of production is obviously a combination of direct costs plus indirect costs of the factory. So we have to add both to find the total cost of production. So we will add these two and we will get a new figure, which is this. Let's look at this now. Okay? We have added prime cost with all the indirect costs of the factory to get a new figure. Then you have add opening work in progress. Now see, what is work in progress? Work in progress simply means the goods that remained unfinished. वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस क्या है? वो गुड्स जो कंप्लीट नहीं हुए, अनकम्प्लीटेड गुड्स, ठीक है, या इनकम्प्लीट गुड्स, those goods that remained incomplete. So what is the opening stock of work in progress? Opening stock of work in progress is those goods that remained unfinished in the previous year. ठीक है, opening work in progress is last year's unfinished goods, last year's. So obviously, first of all, when we started this new year, we would have finished them. ठीक है, so we would have completed these. Opening work in progress are last year's unfinished products, या unfinished goods. One second, let me write it. Opening work in progress is last year's unfinished goods. So obviously, whatever was left incomplete at the end of the last year would have been completed first of all in this year, right? So opening work in progress is included in cost of sales. That's why they have written add opening work in progress. Why? Because these goods are obviously completed this year. They were unfinished last year. ठीक है? Now in this current year we would have completed them. They cannot still be unfinished, right? So that's why opening work in progress is always added, because now we have to include the cost of these products as well during this year, because when you have finished them this year, you will sell them this year, right? And then we less closing work in progress. What is closing work in progress? You might have guessed by now. Closing work in progress is simply goods that remained unfinished this year, the current year we are in. Unfinished goods this year. So obviously they are incomplete this year, so we cannot include their cost in the manufacturing account, as when they are unfinished, how will we sell them? Can you sell unfinished goods? No. So they will be sold in the next year now when they are finished, right? So when they will be sold in the next year, we can only include their cost in next year's manufacturing account. That's why we less closing inventory of work in progress. Why do we add opening work in progress? Because this would have been completed this year, so we can sell it, while closing inventory of work in progress is the unfinished goods belonging to this year. So obviously they are not complete, they cannot be sold. ठीक है? So now let me give you a quick recap of the manufacturing account. ठीक है? In the first section we find cost of raw materials. ठीक है? Here till here, closing inventory. This is what we get. This is cost of raw materials. We add direct wages. We add any other direct expense such as royalties or use of a special machine. We add these three together to get prime cost. Okay. Once you have prime cost, you will list down all the indirect expenses, which we call overheads as well. Okay. And you will add all of these. And then you will get a total of all the indirect expenses. Indirect expense. Your prime cost क्या है? Prime cost is the total of all the direct expenses. ठीक है? Obviously, to find cost of production of the factory, we have to add these two. So we add these two and get a new figure. Once you have a new figure, you add opening work in progress to it. All these things will be given in the question. The value of opening work in progress, closing work in progress. So you should just know the format and put the values. Okay. So Why do we add opening work in progress to this? Because these goods were unfinished last year. They would have been finished this year. So we have to include them in cost because they are ready now. So they are part of our manufacturing cost. So we add them. And then we less closing stock of work in progress because these are unfinished goods this year. So you cannot include them in cost of manufacturing for this year as they will not be sold this year. They are not even manufactured this year completely, right? So once you have this figure, you add opening work in progress to it and subtract closing work in progress from it to get a final value which we call as production cost of goods completed, or in simple words, cost of production or cost of manufacturing. Simple. Okay? So this is the format of a manufacturing account. This will be clear once we solve a question on it. I have an example question. Let's do that first. Let me erase all this and let's move on to the question. Okay, so this is a question on manufacturing account, a very basic question. So let's do this first. We know the format now. You should know the formats by heart. Okay. Okay, let's begin. So let's prepare the manufacturing account over here. Let's give the heading manufacturing account. You don't have to worry about the headings anymore as they are given in the paper. Okay? They will give you an empty space. The heading would be there. You just have to fill the empty space and make the manufacturing account over there. So I told you, what do we start with? We start with cost of raw materials consumed. I hope I have enough space here to complete this. Okay. What do we start with? We start with the opening inventory of what? Of raw materials. Because what are we calculating? We are calculating cost of raw materials consumed. So opening inventory of raw materials. Let's make two columns, one for workings, one for totals as always. Opening inventory of raw materials, where is it given? See, they've given us inventory at 1st September 2018 and they've given us inventory at 31st August 2019. Which one is the earlier date? Obviously this. So this is your opening inventory, 16,500. Okay. Now, are there any purchases of raw materials? Once again, let me erase this. Because after this, what do? We add purchases of raw materials because only the opening inventory is not enough. We need more raw material. So we purchase more because we have to produce a lot of goods. So purchases of raw materials are given 20,000. Let's write it here. Purchases of raw materials. You cannot write r.m. Okay, you cannot use shortcuts. You will lose marks. So purchases of raw materials and the amount is 20,000. So as you can see, everything is given. All you have to know is the format. Okay, you should know the format. Now let's also look at the adjustments at the same time. Factory fuel and power in arrears. Arrears kya hota hai? Accrued. We know what to do with accrued amounts. We add them. So factory fuel and power may I will add 360. This will become 4360. So as you can see, they give basic level adjustments in this. They are not testing you on adjustments. Okay? If they wanted to test you on adjustments, they will take a test on sole trader question. Okay? They just want to see, do you know about manufacturing businesses and can you make a manufacturing account? They will also give you some adjustments, okay, but not very lengthy or difficult adjustments. Okay. And then factory machinery की depreciation दी हुई है, which we will record as an indirect expense of the factory. Now let's move on. After purchases of raw materials, do we have carriage on raw materials? No, we don't have. Okay, this is a very basic example. There is no carriage of raw materials. So if it's not there, we just ignore it. We don't even have to write the heading. We don't have to write carriage of raw materials and then 0 here. No. If it's not given, skip the heading. Now last less closing inventory of raw materials. Closing inventory of raw materials, and the value is given here, 13,700. Less means minus, we use brackets, 13,700. Where's my calculator? Okay, I will have to use my phone, 1 second. Uh, 16,500 plus 20,000 minus 13,700 gives me 22,800. So this 22,800 is the cost of raw materials consumed. Simple. Okay. Now moving on. What comes after this? After this we have direct wages or direct labor. You can call it direct wages. Okay, direct wages. Let's see where they are given. They're given here. Okay, they've just told us factory direct. Okay, very simple and straightforward. So 5,000. So 5,000 should be written directly in the second column here. And is there any other direct expense given, such as royalties, use of a special machine? No. So that's it. You add these two, you will get prime cost. So 22,800 plus 5,000 gives you 27,800. Okay. This is the sum of all the direct expenses of the factory. We call it prime cost. Okay, moving on. Once you have prime cost, you have to list down all the indirect expenses, which we call factory overheads. You can call it factory overheads or indirect expenses of the factory. This is the heading. No amount will come in front of this. Now we have to find all the indirect expenses. First of all, we have indirect wages, which is this 12,000. So you can write indirect salaries or indirect wages, and the amount is 12,000. Okay. Any other indirect expense of the factory? Factory fuel and power 4360, the new amount, the adjusted amount. Okay, factory fuel and power. Factory power and fuel, and I will write 4360. Now anything else? Yes, factory machinery is to be depreciated by 6,000. So factory machine depreciation, machine depreciation, and then the amount from here, which is 600. Add these three, you will get the indirect expenses. So we have 12,000, we have 4360, and we have 600. The total of indirect expenses is 16,960. Okay. Now we will add direct expenses and indirect expenses. So 16,960 plus 27,800 gives me 44,000. 1 second, I think I messed it up. 27,800 plus 16,960 gives me 44,760. Yeah. Okay. So this is the total of direct and indirect expenses. Now I have to add opening work in progress to that and less closing work in progress from it. Okay. There's no space here. So what I can do is I can simply copy it to open board. 1 second. And continue there and show, open this, open board. Okay, now let's continue here. Okay, only two steps are left, which are add opening work in progress and then less closing work in progress. Let's pick the values from the question. Opening work in progress, one second. Opening work in progress is how much? Opening work in progress is given here. See the earlier date. Let me show you the slide. The earlier date, 1 September 2018, and then this is 31st August 2008. So obviously opening is this one, 11,650. ठीक है, 11,650. Let's move on to the closing work in progress. The closing work in progress is 12,000. So 12,000, but in brackets. Now add 11,650 to 44,760. You will add this and you will subtract this to get cost of production. So 44,760 plus 11,650 minus 12,000 gives us 44,410. Let's move it here. What do we call this? This is called the cost of production. Matlab, the total cost that we had to pay in order to produce these goods. Okay? So it's a combination of direct and indirect cost. And then you get this figure, which is cost of production. This is what we need. This is what we prepare the manufacturing account for, to know how much money we spent on producing the goods. Okay? This is what is required by us. That's why we are preparing the manufacturing account. Okay? Let's move on to an advanced level example now. Okay? Let me clear this. All right, this is the technical question, which is a detailed question. Okay? As you can see, the list is a lot longer. But before we begin this, let me tell you something. Okay, I will do this on the whiteboard, which is open board. But first, let me tell you something. See, we have a manufacturing account. And we have an income statement, as you know. We record expenses in both, in a way, right? In the manufacturing account, you will only record expenses relating to the factory. Remember, direct and indirect expenses of the factory. Okay? Any expense relating to the office, to the shop, to the administration, and all that, any financial expense such as loan interest, all those expenses will go in the income statement. Okay? Office, shop, sales staff, admin, finance, all those expenses go in the income statement. Only the expenses relating to the factory, obviously direct and indirect both, will be recorded in the manufacturing account. Okay? Now let's move on. Because why did I tell you that? Because you should know to identify between these two. They can ask you to make the manufacturing account as well as the income statement, and they will give you a list of so many things. So you should know. Okay? You should have an idea. Now, let me tell you one more thing. They can also give you an expense like this. Let's say rent expense. 10,000 would be given in the question. But then in the adjustment, they will tell you that this rent, let's say 60% of this rent belongs to the factory, and 40% belongs to the office. So very basic stuff. You should know that 60% of 10,000 is obviously 6,000. 6,000 should be recorded in the manufacturing account in indirect expenses. Okay? whereas the remaining 4,000 should be recorded in the income statement. So you should know how to divide the expense between the factory and the office. Okay, basic math. They will give you all the information, you just have to calculate. They will give you the total figure, they will tell you how much belongs to the factory, how much belongs to the office. So obviously the amount that belongs to the factory should go in the manufacturing account, whereas the amount that belongs to the office should go in the income statement. Simple. Okay, that is not given in this question, that's why I've told you this separately, but in the questions you will get this regularly. Okay, now let's erase this, move on to whiteboard, and let's start preparing the manufacturing account. For this, they want us to prepare the manufacturing, the income statement, and the SOFP. They want us to make all three. Okay, let's zoom this in first and read this one by one. Alright. The first thing they have mentioned are motor vehicle repairs. Again, they haven't mentioned is this belonging to the factory. So we will suppose that this belongs to the office, or it is being used to sell goods for deliveries and all that. So we will include this in the income statement. I for income statement, M for manufacturing. Okay, let me write it here. I is income statement, M is for manufacturing, and SOFP is for statement of financial position. We have to include things in only these three statements. Okay, electricity of the factory, obviously factory expenses are recorded in the manufacturing account, whereas the electricity of the office should be recorded in the income statement. Manufacturing wages, obviously manufacturing account belonging to the factory. General expenses of the factory, again manufacturing account. Discount allowed will be in the income statement. Commission of sales team, again income statement. Purchases of raw material, manufacturing account. Rent of the factory, manufacturing. Rent of the office, income statement. Premises, machinery, office equipment, these are our non-current assets which should go and which should be recorded in our SOFP. Then we have office salaries, which will obviously go in the expenses of the income statement. Trade payables and receivables are our current assets and current liabilities. They will go in the SOFP as well. Okay, so you see how I am identifying things before starting the question. Bank, money in the bank, current asset, SOFP. Sales, an income statement item, as you know. Provision for depreciations. Okay, these are the depreciations, the provisions. So premises, they haven't mentioned it's the office premise or what. Office equipment and machinery. Machinery is generally being used in the factory, but they should have mentioned factory here. But we will suppose this is for the factory, and premises and office equipment is for income statement. Okay, now let's zoom this out, bring it here, and see the leftover things. Okay, we have opening inventory of raw materials, finished goods, and work in progress. Okay, so we have opening inventory of all three. They have told us the value of opening inventory of raw materials, how much raw materials we had at the start of the year. They have told us the opening inventory of finished goods, and they have told us the opening inventory of work in progress. Things that were unfinished last year, they might have been finished this year now. They have also given us drawings and capital, which are part of SOFP. Now, once we have identified things, the second step is to look quickly at the adjustments. Okay. Additional information. Inventory at 31st August. So they have given us closing inventory of all three: raw materials, finished goods, and work in progress. Depreciate machinery by 2000, office equipment 1000, and premises by 2000. Okay, so they have told us about the depreciations. They're not making us calculate that, so it's fine. We will record these depreciations. The depreciation of office equipment and premises will go in the income statement, whereas depreciation of machinery will go in manufacturing. Manufacturing wages due but unpaid, 230. Okay, so manufacturing wages are given. I will include 230 to it, right, because it is unpaid or accrued. Accrued amounts are always added. So plus 230. Let me zoom this in to write, otherwise it will be difficult. Manufacturing wages plus 230. So this will become 1230. 230. ठीक है, done. Now zooming this out, office salaries 4500 are due but unpaid. So again do the same thing. Accrued office salaries 3000, we will add 4500 to that. Let's zoom this in, add 4500 to it. This will become 7500, and we are done with the adjustments. So they have given us basic adjustments, and now they want us to prepare the manufacturing account. Okay, let's zoom this out and start making the manufacturing account. Over here we can use this space. Okay, let me erase all this. Let me also move this out and bring it here. We can just bring it here because these things, okay, we need these, but yeah, here. Now let's begin with the manufacturing account. So as you know, the manufacturing account will start with, I'm not writing the date and all, I'm just telling you the format for now, but you should write manufacturing account as at and the date, or manufacturing account, sorry, for the year ended and the date given in the question. Make two columns, one for workings, one for totals. Okay. We can also move this question a bit to the left now, or no, because I have written there, so I cannot move this. Okay, never mind. Let's just use this space. We have enough. Okay. So first of all, we have to calculate cost of raw materials consumed. This is the heading. We always start with the opening inventory of raw materials. As you know from the format, you have to learn the format by heart. Opening inventory of raw materials. Okay. What is the value? The value is given here 4000. So I will write 4000 here. Okay. Don't use shortcuts, write raw materials. I don't have space, as you can see. Otherwise I would have also done that, but I'm telling you, you should write raw materials. Okay, I will try to use this space and write properly. Okay, after opening inventory, we need purchases of raw materials. Let's find if they are given or not. Purchases of raw materials. Here. So we will write purchases of raw materials, and the value is given in the question. Values are given in the question. Okay, you should just be knowing the format, and then things are very easy for you. Okay, now let's make the dollar sign here. I know I'm blocking the space so you cannot see here, but let's suppose that the second column is here for the totals. Okay, after purchases of raw materials, we have do we have any purchase returns of raw materials? We have to find that. No, they are not given. Do we have carriage on raw materials? No, we have went through the question and we did not find that, so it's not there. Ignore things that are not given. If purchase returns of raw materials was there, we will write less purchase returns of raw materials and then write the amount. If carriage inwards on raw materials was given, we will write carriage on raw materials and write the amount. It's not given, so we will simply do the last step, which is less closing inventory of raw materials. And then write the amount here in front of this. The amount is given here in the adjustments. One second. Here, see, Closing inventory of raw materials is 3500. One second. So I will have to write 3500 here. And obviously I will put this in brackets because less means subtract. Now let's use your calculators and check what is the cost of raw materials. 4000 plus 24,600 minus 3500. It is 25,100. This is the cost of raw materials consumed. ठीक है. Moving on to direct wages. Manufacturing wages. Obviously, these are those people who are directly involved in the manufacturing process. So we have direct wages worth 12,230. We will only use the new amounts. Okay. The working, you can show the working in brackets if you want. 12,000, which was given in the question, plus 230, the accrued amount. So 12,230. Are there any royalties? Is there any use of special machine? We have went through the question. We did not find any. So we have only cost of raw materials consumed and direct wages given. Okay. We will add these two. Let's use our calculators quickly. We are getting 25,100 plus 12,230. So 37,330. What should I call it? I will call it prime cost. It's a very important heading. This is all your direct expenses combined. In this case, we had just two: cost of raw materials and direct wages. Okay. Once you have prime cost, you will write down the next heading, which is add factory overheads. Now you have to list down all the indirect expenses of the factory. And the list is in front of us. So we can go through this and find all of those. There were no indirect wages given in this question. As you can see, there was no supervisor salary. If there was any supervisor or guard or cleaner salary, we will also write it here. Say supervisor salary or indirect wages. They are usually given. Okay, it's a rare question in which it's not given, but indirect wages will be given. So if they are given, you will record them in factory overheads, which are the indirect expenses of the factory. Remember, in this question we did not have those. So we will start with the order. We have electricity of factory 1980. So we will write electricity and then the amount 1980. Okay, in the workings column, because we will add all and then write the final value in total. Electricity of factory is done. We have picked the value from here. Then we have general expenses of the factory. Okay, sundry expenses means general expenses. That is an outdated term. So just write general expenses. Then we know these belong to the factory. They have written that. So 4580. Okay. Now, what else do we have? We have rent of factory, which is given here as 1300. So rent 1300. Okay. Any other factory expense? Yes, the last one, which is depreciation of factory machinery. They have told us you have to depreciate machine by 2000, given here. See, let me highlight that. One second. Given here, depreciate machinery by 2000. They told us about this in the question. So we will do that. We don't have to calculate the depreciation on our own. They have given it to us. So depreciation of factory machinery. One second. Let me move this back here. Okay. Now, depreciation of machine. Just write the amount given, which is 2000. I think we are done with all the expenses given in this question. So these are the indirect expenses. We will add these. 1980 plus 4580 plus 1300 plus 2000, and we will get 9860. Okay. Now the final thing, you have to add prime cost, which are the direct costs, with all the indirect costs of the factory to get a new amount. So you will add these two figures together. So 37,330 plus 9,860 gives me 47,190. Okay. Zooming this out because I need space here for the last two steps. So let me just move it here. What do we do after that? I told you in the format. You have to simply add opening work in progress. Why do we add opening work in progress to the cost of production? Because these were the unfinished goods from the previous year. Obviously they are completed this year, so you have to record them. Opening work in progress is given here. Let's find the opening inventory of work in progress here. Opening inventory work in progress 3670, and then you less closing inventory of work in progress. Why do we less? Because we cannot include that in the cost of production for this year. Why? Because these goods are not manufactured yet. When they are not manufactured, how can you include them in the cost? They're still incomplete. They will not be sold this year. So the closing inventory of work in progress is given in additional information 1200. So 1200. Okay. Let's zoom this in again. And then we have to move down and do the final step. We have to add opening work in progress to this and less closing work in progress from this amount. So let's do that. 47190 plus 3670 minus 1200 gives us 49,660. This is my cost of production. The cost that I had to pay to produce these goods in my factory. Okay. Let me zoom this out and show you the actual thing quickly. This is the manufacturing account. Okay. Let's erase this. That was just to cover the area where my video is, so that I don't write here accidentally. Now let's move it here. This is the manufacturing account. Okay. For the question given here. This is the only new thing. That's why I have shown you how to follow the format and how to make the manufacturing account. It is not difficult. If you know the format, it is very easy. Okay, as you have seen. So you should learn the format by heart, and then these things are given in the question. You just have to look at the things there and bring them here and note them down in the format. So it's simple. The main thing you have to find here is cost of production. Okay. We will use this cost of production in the income statement as well. Let me show you how. I will not make the income statement or SOFP, but I will show you the solution to the income statement and SOFP of this word example, and then explain the steps. Okay. Let's go to the PPT again. Here. Okay. See. This is the income statement. Okay. Where did we pick these figures from? We picked these figures from the question given. Okay. The only difference in the income statement is that in the cost of sales section, the format remains the same. You start with opening inventory. You add purchases. You less purchase returns if they are given. You add carriage inwards. and then you less closing inventory. This is what we do, right? Usually in the cost of sales section. But remember, opening inventory of what? Of raw materials? No. What do you sell? You sell finished goods. So you will use only data relating to finished goods here in the cost of sales section. So you will write opening inventory of finished goods. Okay, the goods that you have from last year, the ones that you manufactured last year, and those that were unsold. Then purchases of finished goods. Now you should have asked here that why are we purchasing finished goods when we manufacture our own goods? Why are we purchasing finished goods? Okay? In special cases, let's say your factory can only produce, not dollars, let's say your factory can only produce 1000 tables. But your customer gave you an order to manufacture 3000 tables in this year. So what should you do? Should you just reject the offer, or should you manufacture 1000 tables and then contact someone, contact a friend and ask them to manufacture 2000 tables for you, and then you buy those tables from them and sell them to your customers, right? You will have to purchase finished goods in some specific cases when you cannot manufacture those goods yourself. So you will purchase from someone else and then resell it to the buyer. Okay? So you will have to purchase finished goods sometime in special cases. That's why purchases of finished goods is also present in most of the questions. Carriage inwards of what? Of raw materials? No. If it was for raw materials, it should be in the manufacturing account, because manufacturing account deals with all the expenses of the factory. This is carriage inwards of finished goods. If you're buying any finished goods, you have to pay transportation cost on that. Okay? And then less closing inventory of what? Finished goods again. Let me write here, less closing inventory of finished goods. So you see, there's no difference in the format. You just write finished goods in front of everything, and you also pick the values of finished goods. Closing inventory of finished goods. Okay? Notice I have left this space empty. Why? Why did I leave this space empty? Because you have to include cost of production here. The goods that you have produced. The cost of producing those goods. Obviously, you're selling those goods, so you have to include the cost of production. Sorry, one second. I wrote cost of produced. Cost of production. You have to include that. Cost of production. Okay? And where will this figure come from? This figure will come from your manufacturing account. This 49660. So you have to pick this figure from here and bring it here. Okay? 9660. This is what you calculate in the manufacturing account. And all this will be given in the question. These figures will be given. Okay? This data will be given. So you just have to pick it from the question and make it. So let's take this over there now. One second. Previous, and then end show. Let's take this income statement there. Okay, I'm erasing the manufacturing account now. We have the cost of production 49600. So let me erase this. One second, can I pick? Yeah. Alright. Now let me zoom this in first. And then let's paste the income statement solution here. Now see. Income statement is exactly same as that what you did in sole trader or partnership business. Sales figure. Where did you pick this from? You picked this from the question. Sales 70,000. Okay, cost of sales. Opening inventory of finished goods. I told you we will discuss only finished goods in this, or we will only enter things relating to finished goods. Where did the value come from? From here, opening inventory, finished goods. 16,000. ठीक है. Then we add cost of production, which we calculate in manufacturing account as I have shown you. Then there was no carriage inwards or purchases of finished goods. They will be rarely given. ठीक है. If they are given, you also have to include them as I have shown you on the previous slide. Then less closing inventory of finished goods, which is given here in additional information. Finished goods closing inventory 2300. So we have done that. Do the calculation, you get cost of sales. You know, sales minus cost of sales will give you gross profit, and then you minus or subtract all the other expenses of the office from your gross profit to get the profit for the year, just like you do normally. So the only change is in the cost of sales section. You have to use data relating to finished goods and make sure to include factory cost of production here. The rest of the things are the same, okay, as you have done in all the other topics. Now, let's bring the SOFP here. Let me delete this and let me show you the changes to the SOFP. There's no change actually, apart from one very minor change. This is the solution to the SOFP. Let's move it here. Here it is. Let me expand this a bit so that you can see it clearly. See, the non-current asset section is the same. Okay, cost, accumulated depreciation, net book value. So nothing has changed in this. The capital section is the same. Capital, less loss or add profit, and less drawings. This is the same. Current liability section is the same as it was for sole trader or any other business, any trading business. Non-current liability section, which is not here because there was no non-current liability in this question, but that one is also same. The only difference is in the current asset section, and that too is very minor. Okay? Now, instead of one closing inventory, we have three types of closing inventories, right? Closing inventory of raw materials, that raw material which is not used during this year. Closing inventory of work in progress, those goods that are still incomplete at the end of the year. And closing inventory of finished goods, those goods that are complete but they're still unsold. So we have closing inventory of three things now instead of just one. In a trading business, we only have closing inventory of finished goods, right? So we just write closing inventory and that's it. That's closing inventory of finished goods because we are just buying finished goods and selling them. In these businesses, we also have raw materials and some work in progress. Okay? So make sure to include the closing inventory of raw materials, work in progress, and finished goods. That's the only difference in the SOFP section. Other than that, everything is exactly the same. You have seen the adjustments are also similar to that of a sole trader. So the only difference, I'm repeating one more time in this topic, is that first of all, you have to prepare a manufacturing account, which is this. Use this format and prepare the manufacturing account. And then in the statement of financial position, there's a minor change that you have to include three types of closing inventories, not just one. Okay? I've told you why. And in the income statement, there's a minor change that you have to include cost of production in the cost of sales section. Other than that, it is also same. Okay? That's it for this topic. I hope it is clear. If you have any questions, you can always ask. You can send me a message. You can also write a message on the video and I will reply back for sure. Thank you for watching. That's it. Hopefully, I will make the next video on limited companies soon. So keep posted.